Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Bring It Back. This week's show, I talk about TV shows that were canceled and or short-lived that I would like to see get brought back in some shape or form. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Netflix series Dead Boy Detectives. Really quickly, if you're unfamiliar with Dead Boy Detectives is, it follows Charles and Edwin, who are these teenage ghosts. They're from different eras, but they, in their afterlives, they end up finding each other. Well, they kind of refuse to go to their afterlives, and they come together to be dead boy detectives. They work to solve unresolved issues for the dead. So that's kind of like the general premise, and eventually they end up meeting a psychic named Crystal, who in her own regards has her own issues. She was possessed by her boyfriend, who she didn't know at the time was a demon, and now she's lost her memories and she's trying to remember who she was. And so it ends up being this very like episode by episode case of just like, all right, well, we're dealing with this case, we're dealing with this case, while the overarching story is also about figuring out Crystal's circumstances, while Charles and Edwin are, you know, constantly on the run from death, who is trying to drag them to their afterlife because they've been on the run for years. So that's the general premises, but like I said, it's like very much like a, hey, they're resolving issues for the dead. The show is pretty much very supernatural heavy, and it does kind of have like, it's not full horror, but it does have some horror-esque elements to it. It can be scary, it can be spooky, and it's just interesting learning like the lore of how ghosts work in this universe, and like I said, these other supernatural beings like who have their own circumstances and their own lore about what their circumstances are in this universe. Like, there's just a lot of interesting elements. I should also note that this is set in the, I mean, it's a DC property, but more specifically, it's set in the Sandman universe specifically. So it's kind of, especially this version of the series. I mean, the comics as well, but like this particular series isn't like fully its own thing. It's actually set in the Sandman TV show universe as well. I mean, being on Netflix kind of plays into that as well, but obviously news came out recently that the show was sadly canceled after one season. Specifically, and I figured as much. I mean, it usually ends up being the big reason why anything gets canceled. Sadly, not enough people watched it, which is such a bummer because I thoroughly enjoyed it, because I think it's a nice mystery episode of the week type of situation. And it's in this interesting spot where it's like the stories they set up in season one, you don't get full resolutions for things, but a lot of stuff you do, and it's just about where things would have gone from here. You know, because they were set up for so much more story, especially with an ever-going universe, especially because, well, we know we're getting at least a season 2 of The Sandman, but that's already been in production, so I don't know if there's going to be any crossover. Like an example I would be using is like Marvel's Runaways and Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger had like they pop up at the end of one episode, and then an entire episode crossed over with the Runaways. But by that point in time, like, this was going to be the final season of Runaways, and sadly Cloak and Dagger had been canceled at that time, so that was kind of like technically the last time you get to see those characters. Or the version of those characters. So I'm curious if we're going to kind of have a similar thing, like maybe there was some stuff already filmed for the Sandman. I don't know where the production currently stands with that. I know at one point they were filming and then they had to stop, but whatever the case may be, I don't know where that stands, of where we'd see like Charles and Edwin or anything from that show pop up in the Sandman, because like I said, it might already be kind of done production wise, so there's no like resolution we potentially get in this season. If it gets a third season, maybe we would, in that capacity of like, oh, their story would continue on just in the background of the Sandman in some shape or form in that universe. That's the closest thing we could probably get to a resolution of sorts, because, you know, once again, it's a Netflix show, so it's less likely that Netflix will bring it back. Not unless someone else gets the rights to it. It is a DC property. I don't know if Warner's in a position, or even if they'd want to like grab that series, especially if not enough people watch it, so no one would probably care enough. You know, at Warner, they're probably like, well, there's no point in getting that back. Like, maybe we'll do something with it way in the future, but for now, like, you know, this version of it's done. Maybe we'll do our own version. I don't know if there's some contractual thing where if Warner Brothers Discovery wanted to do something with it, they'd have to wait a while. But I would rather like this version of the story continue, just because this is the version I've come to know, which is so interesting too, because I talked about this during my review. My introduction to the Dead Boy Detectives was actually kind of in a backdoor pilot episode of Doom Patrol. In season 3, there was a Dead Boy Detectives episode where they showed up. And so I think after some around that time is when like they greenlit one. So it's supposed to come out on Max. I don't know if like that show got shut down, and then they kind of like moved it over to Netflix to make it and started fresh, because it's not the same cast members that played them in the Doom Patrol episode. I don't know if it's supposed to be like, well, it's a multiverse thing of like that's a different Dead Boy Detectives in this one, or was the one that was on Netflix was always the plan? I don't know. I haven't looked too deeply into that, but yeah. So that's why I'm so bummed, because I had been looking forward to the show upon like hearing like, oh, it was greenlit to become a series, and then it kind of faded from my mind until the teasers popped up. I'm like, oh my god, I didn't know this was still happening. So it's such a bummer, because I do think it's such a great show. Once again, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I thoroughly enjoyed like the, once again, episodical nature of like, oh yeah, it's a new adventure of the week, because it kind of fits a little bit with like the Sandman had, like, it's the TV show specifically kind of gives it this overarching story, but my understanding is the Sandman's very much like a episodic story, just kind of like, which is in the same vein. Obviously this version of it's not in the same universe, but the show Lucifer is in that same capacity where it was like episodical, and obviously that character is canonical to the Sandman universe, but obviously like the TV show we've already gotten previously, the Sandman is not canonical to the same character and story in the Sandman TV show proper. So once again, it's just kind of sad news, and like I said, because of it just being a Netflix series, I highly doubt we would, like, it's very, very unlikely we would ever get the show to come back. I wouldn't want it just to come back for a season 2. I would want it to have longer legs. Like, if that means 3, 4, 5 seasons if possible, I would want that, you know? So it's just kind of a bummer. That is also the interesting and complicated thing with this, because, like, yes, you know, we might not be able to get this version of these characters in the story, but if you are curious about learning more about these characters and see the stories that they're involved in, you will always have the comics. So there is that. It's not like, oh, there's nowhere else to get these stories. You do have that benefit. So we may never get the TV show, but there will always be the comics that me and anyone else can always pick up to kind of get more stories with these characters. There's always that silver lining, even if we may never get the TV show version. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good